Okay, hi everyone. This is a brief video lecture focusing on sentence structure and length variation. Um, the reason why we're getting into all this right now, it's about making your writing more evocative, making it more efficient, more compelling, making it more interesting to the reader. And a big part of this has to do with sentence structure and length variation. This is something that I see students almost 100% across the board struggling with. And it's not your fault. It's the way high school has taught you to write. High school has taught you to write in short declarative sentences, subject, verb, short sentences. And you've also, with that, you've also been taught to write in this formulaic way of, an essay should have 5 paragraphs, a paragraph should have 5 sentences, that sort of thing. This is not the way to write. This makes it very problematic, and writing is never this formulaic either. So I want to start talking about how to vary your sentence structure and length, and the way this affects the reader. So I have an example that I think does a good job of illustrating this, but generally speaking, you want to sort of have a nice mix of like long sentences, of short sentences, of medium length sentences, and you want your sentences to vary in structure too. You don't always want your sentence to be, I did this, like subject, verb. You need to sort of flip it. You need to add transitions. You need to add modifiers, that sort of thing. And the purpose for this is when you have like similar lengths, similar structures, it creates monotony in your writing. It's really psychologically, it's that the problem is the pause. Because when you read and you get to a period, there's a pause. Or when you get to a comma, there's, a shorter pause. It's that pause at the period that creates problems. There's a handout on Canvas called Sentence Variation. And I just want to go through this with you because I think it does a really good job of illustrating this. So, I didn't make this. It's from another professor. But first off, I'm going to read this aloud. You should always read your writing aloud because you will be able to hear issues with variation, rhythm, hear issues with repetitions or wordiness or awkwardness. These things will sound strange to your ear, okay? So, I'm going to read this aloud. I know it's silly, but I want you to listen to what's happening. This sentence has 5 words. Here are 5 more words. 5-word sentences are fine, but several together become monotonous. Listen to what is happening. The writing is getting boring. The sound of it drones. It's like a stuck record. The ear demands some variety. Now listen. I vary the sentence length and I create music. Pause. Never do this. Never repeat a word like this because that's very distracting to the reader and you never want to distract the reader. Okay. So now listen. I vary the sentence length and I create music. The writing sings. It has a pleasant rhythm, a lilt, a harmony. I use short sentences and I use sentences of medium length. And sometimes when I am certain the reader is rested, I will engage him with a sentence of considerable length. Again, don't be repetitive like this. One that burns with energy and builds with all the impetus of crescendo, the roll of the drums, the crash of the cymbals, sounds that say, listen to this, it is important. So write with a combination of short, medium, and long sentences. Create a sound that pleases the reader's ear. Don't just write words, write music. So you can hear how that actually changes when there's variation like this, and then when it's all very formulaic and monotonous up here. Now, that said, there are times when you want to use a bunch of short sentences together intentionally, or a bunch of long sentences together intentionally. And this all has to do with psychology, actually. So when you use, maybe 3 short sentences together, after having nice variation, or a bunch of short sentences together, it stands out. So if you have, good variation, good rhythm, and then there's, a bunch of short sentences together, subconsciously we notice the difference, and that difference is jarring. If you have good variation and then a bunch of short sentences, that sort of repetitive pause, it actually creates a sense of tension. it can actually create a sense of anxiety. So you see in a lot of writing where, if it's just a stupid example, if it's like a thriller novel and somebody's about to get murdered or something like that, you see all these really short, abrupt sentences. That's meant to create a sense of tension before this thing happens, okay? So you can use it intentionally to great effect. Now, there are also times when you want to use a bunch of longer sentences. A bunch of longer sentences in a row is really excellent for sort of painting, images, details, description. It relaxes the reader, and it's sort of just, it flows in a way that you can, give a ton of information, a ton of details, a ton of imagery, a ton of sensory details, whatever. But in general, you want to have a nice variation. But then when you break this rule intentionally, it creates an emotional response in the reader. Another part of this is varying your openings. Repetitions in general, repetitive word choice in general is problematic in that it can distract the reader. If you have, the same word used a bunch of times, you're not intentionally doing this, but every time you get to that word, you almost pause and you're like, wait, they just said that. So you don't want to distract the reader in that way. And most students are pretty good with this, but the big problem is how we open our sentences. If you have a bunch of sentences in a row that are the blank, blah, 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 the blank, blah, 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 that repetition of the can really throw off the reader. And these are really the big ones that we use all the time. So just be careful of this. It's really simple. It's really deceptively simple in that you can just sort of rework that beginning. Even you can easily flip, the action with the noun. Instead of saying, I'm trying to think of a good example. Instead of saying, like, I went to the grocery store and ran into an old friend, you could say something like, while at the grocery store, I ran into an old friend. Things like that can really change up your rhythm, okay? So read your writing aloud. It's going to help you find these things. And it's also going to help you build this rhythm, okay? So a lot of the feedback I'm giving on the autobiographies, the nature walk, the observations, all those things, like I said, most students struggle with this, so I'm trying to give you examples and point out where you can easily combine sentences. That's really the first way to do this, is instead of, worrying about rewriting everything, look for sentences that naturally flow into each other, and then you can combine those very easily. And I'm giving you examples in your own writing where that can be done that will greatly enhance the rhythm, okay? And that is all for this one.